Yes, yes, this time we're actually going to put this thing together. I'm Alex, and welcome to the Renaissance Builder. Normally, it's recommended that you put the motherboard together, like you can use the box here. Like you can just, fold your box up and then use your box to build the motherboard on. But since we are using an open air test bench, I'm going to go ahead and use the open air test bench. It kind of makes sense to me. Not only that, mounting this thing on the open air test bench grounds the motherboard. So, going to get our standoffs ready. And I'm going to go ahead and start putting the standoffs in. Let's put this in a view that you're going to appreciate more. So I already know I'm going to need standoff here. Standoff here. Gonna need a standoff here. And then a standoff right behind that one here. Yay, I fix it. All right, now that our standoffs are in place, I'm going to go ahead and set the motherboard on here. Now, mind you, there's nothing on the back side of this motherboard that I actually need to get to. Everything is on the front side. So I can go ahead and mount the motherboard up, which, when you mount a motherboard to a case, you'll notice how you can kind of see if I can get it for you, you can kind of see how these little holes are metal socketed. That's to ground the motherboard to the case, to the power supply. So the power supply is grounded all the way to the motherboard. So when it's plugged in, everything's grounded. So let's go ahead and mount this up. Now your case normally comes, be very careful when you're doing this. Don't drop a motherboard. For God's sakes, don't drop a motherboard. But you don't want to risk scratching any of the traces or anything on the back side of the motherboard. So always be careful when you're handling that. Now, it's a good idea when you're assembling anything, actually, with multiple fasteners, to get the majority of your fasteners in place before you tighten them down. That way you know everything lines up. So now that everything, all the screws are allocated in there, I can go ahead and tighten them all down. And there it is. Our motherboard is now mounted inside and grounded to the chassis. So now, as long as we are constantly grounding ourselves to the chassis, in fact, I can take my wrist strap or something and ground it to there. Now we know everything is grounded together. Like there's no way for static to build up at this point. Well, between me and the motherboard at least. You still have to be careful. Now, let's talk about the CPU. Now that's something I haven't shown in here very much, is what I am putting in this computer is the i9 9900K. I think what I'm going to do is a close-up. Yeah, we're going to do a closer up of this thing. Ta-da! And ta-da! So here's the processor. So that is unboxed and down to its naked, unglorious packaging. What is normally, well, was a $500 to $600 processor, now is still almost a $500 processor. So, 8 cores, 16 threads, will run over 5 gigs or megs, I forget. proven to run over 5 gigs. Now, here's the processor. So, I'm going to go to a close-up angle and install the processor. They give something else. Ooh, nice little foam packaging and a book. Installation instructions. I guess I should probably read that. Ooh, and a sticker. That's nice. We're going to have a sticker-charged computer. Now, the process of installing a CPU is not all that terribly difficult. You just have to be careful. So, follow the directions here. First thing we're going to do is peel. Oh, yeah. Oh, whew, that was a beautiful peel. Oh, this one too. Not quite as beautiful. Yeah. Ooh, look, there's another one. Get it, come on. Get you. Look at that. Sexy peel. I don't know why people get a kick out of that, but they do. So, first step, we have a processor here. We take this arm and we move it out from under this here catch. And then we pull it up. Do not take this plastic off. That reveals the socket. Now you'll notice the socket has a bunch of tiny little metal pins in there. Those are delicate. That's why the plastic cover is there. So now we're going to open our CPU at this point. Do not touch the pads on the bottom. Grab it by the edges. All right, now the key is to look for an identifier. In this case, the CPU itself has an identifier on this corner and this corner. When you look at the socket, there's a dot right here, but more importantly, you'll notice this notch and this notch. Well, those notches line up with this socket and this, socket, this little notch and that notch. Meaning, this can only go in one way. Do not force it, do not push it, do not drop it. Everything is very delicate is what I'm looking for right now. So you gently put this thing in here, gently set her down in. Wiggle it a little bit to make sure it's there, and there you go. Now, you would think the dot would line up with the dot, but it doesn't. The triangle lines up with the dot. I think they cut the corner of this out to indicate the triangle, whatever. The saving grace here is these two notches that allow the PCB of the chip to go in only one way. So again, be very careful. Do not drop it and do not force it to set the chip down in like that. Now, here's another key. Do not remove the plastic. Watch what happens. You take the arm down, and again, carefully, all right? These fingers need to go under that screw. And you push. Latch this arm under that finger and watch. Ta-da! The plastic removed itself. All right? Don't remove this. Also, do not throw this away. If you ever need to send your board back for warranty, this has to be on it to protect that socket. If this isn't on it, they won't warranty the board. Unless you're like very, very lucky. So make sure this stays with the motherboard box. In this case, do not throw away boxes. Do not lose this piece. And there you go. There's our CPU installed. Now, at this point, we would normally go over the installation of the cooling system, but I'm going to save that for another time. Well, just because I feel like it, I want to get on to these other components. All right, so now that the CPU is installed, the next thing we're going to install is the RAM. Now, in this case, I have two different selections of RAM. Now, RAM is called its random access memory. RAM is the buffer that the motherboard uses to store information until the CPU or the graphics card or any one of the other items actually wants to use it. So think of it as like short-term memory. We're going to put our short-term memory in there so the CPU can be like, hey, I'll get to that later. Right now I'm doing something, so I'll get to that later. Now, the reason I have two different sticks of RAM is one of them is faster but smaller. The other one is a little bit slower but larger. So one of them is 16 gigabytes of RAM at 4400 megahertz. The other one is 32 gigs of RAM at 3200 megahertz. So it's not quite twice as fast, but it is significantly faster RAM. The case latency, which is a bunch of numbers that basically dictate how long it takes for different processes to happen inside the RAM, are roughly the same. So the difference is, I want to try out in the editing, is it going to be better to have faster RAM or to have more RAM? Probably going to end up being better to have more RAM, but we'll find it out. We're going to put it to the test. For now, I'm going to go ahead and put the 32 gig kit in until we get to testing that. Again, later episode, we'll do a test just to see how it works. So this is the 32 gig, 3200 megahertz RAM. All right, so a little bit different vantage point for this one because I wanted you to be able to see it more clearly. So we're going to unpackage the RAM. And again, it's very important that you don't touch the contact pads. Like that's important. You know, they're gold plated and any oils and stuff from your skin can really mess that up. So try not to touch those. So again, this is a Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro. That means this here little strip is going to glow with the whole RGB goodness. Now, you'll notice that there's a notch right here. This notch and the placement of this notch is very specific to DDR4 RAM. DDR4 is the latest generation of RAM. Previous generations went DDR3, DDR2, and DDR RAM. That's going back a ways. My computer here uses, the one I'm using right now, it's 10 years old, uses DDR3. So that gives you an idea of how old DDR RAM is. All right, so this notch is very specific and it is placed at not the center. So they only go in one direction. So when you put them in, don't force it. And they go in, so this slot and this, so this slot and this slot is where they go. And what I recommend doing is sliding it in the corner like that, straightening it out so it's actually in the slot, right? Now you want to be careful. All right, so you stick it in and you squarely push down until this lever latches in place and you get a nice solid click. And there you go. Now we're going to take our other stick and put that in, same direction, same way. We stick it in, push squarely, and there you have it. Now your notches are pushed in. Now when you go to pull the RAM out, you flip this notch down and it pushes the RAM out for you. So that's really it. That's your RAM installation. Not too complicated, but it's important to maintain going in square so you don't screw up the pins that go in there. Now while we're here, we're going to go over the installation of the NVMe SSD. At least the onboard NVMe SSD. Since the DIMM.2 slot is designed to be the faster of the two, I'm going to put a 1 terabyte, just one 1 terabyte NVMe SSD directly on the motherboard. And set it aside. Grab this here plate. This is actually a heat sink that we're taking off right now, designed to keep the NVMe's cooler. In fact, you'll notice there's heat tape on the backside. Now, what this reveals is two sockets, one on either side. Yeah, two sockets, one on either side, and these here nuts that are actually firmly fastened to the motherboard. Those nuts, now I have to go looking for screws. Okay, so I actually had to look up I actually had to look it up to be sure that we were doing this correctly. But the NVMe channels on the motherboard actually go through the Z390 chipset, which might be this chip right here, but the onboard memory actually go through the chipset, whereas the DIMM.2 memory actually goes straight to the CPU. So I'm going to use my less fast, my larger storage memory, the stuff I don't need to be very fast, which is still faster than anything else out there. Well, it's still faster than normal solid-state drives and way faster than spinning disk hard drives. So, we're going to install, and this is a Crucial 1 terabyte. So, Crucial 1 terabyte NVMe M.2 SSD. There's a spacer. I need a spacer in there, and they give 2 different spacer sizes for this, and they don't tell me which one goes to which. So we need to play around and find out exactly which spacer I need. But before we do that, I need to find out what hole we're actually supposed to use. Alright, so we got to use this hole right here to plug that in. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set that down, and we're going to try this spacer. Fall off, obviously. So here's how this thing goes in. You line up the key. Again, there's a notch right here, and you line that up with the notch that's in there. You don't stick it straight in. You just stick it in how it's comfortable. There we go. All right, and it'll sit up like that, and then you push it down. Now the key here is that when it goes down, it has to sit level. So is that sitting level? It's not sitting super level. So I kind of want to try one of the other standoffs. Put this in, slide that in, push this down. Oh, beautiful. That's perfect. That's perfect. So now we take our driver, here it is. We'll get up on one of these here screws. I tell you, I definitely recommend a magnetic driver for this. Definitely. All right, and you put the screw right in there and tighten down. Ta-da! Now that is the installed M.2 SSD. From there, we go to put our heatsink back on. Put that on there. Screw it down. There. Now, now we actually have our 1 terabyte M.2 NVMe SSD mounted. The entire point of the DIMM.2 accessory is that it gives our hard drives direct access to the CPU or vice versa. It gives the CPU direct access to the hard drives. So that's the point, and that's why we're going to put our faster SSDs on the DIMM.2. Same thing happens here. We need the standoffs to actually hold this straight. Now in this case, again, we might use the shorter standoffs or the longer standoffs. But again, we place it here, so we want to use this hole. It's actually marked out, the 2280. So I'm going to go with the shorter standoff this time because this connector is shorter. Push it down, and then the tiny little mounting screw. Have I mentioned this episode how much I like the iFixit kit yet? Because I do. I really do. This thing's great. and put the little screw on. Again, in similar fashion, we have the heat tape on that. Now, mind you, this chunk of aluminum isn't actually, there's not a hell of a lot of surface area going on here, so it's not actually going to do that much for cooling the NVMe as much as it is going to be a heat soak. The hard drives don't run hard steady for long periods of time. They just run hard for short periods of time. So what the chunk of aluminum can do is absorb. It provides a much larger saturation point. So by the time the chunk of aluminum is saturated, the NVMe is already done doing what it needs to do. So it can move on to, cooling back down again. We can talk more about the specifics of that, again, in another episode, because this one's already getting egregiously long, but again, don't tighten down until both screws are in. Well, until all your screws are in. It's just intelligent. All right. And that's one side. Same process for the other side. Oh, this side has 3 screws. There it is, the DIMM.2. Just as the RAM goes in, the DIMM.2, you'll notice there's a finger at the end, and there's a little notch right here. Again, it slides in. Oh, make sure that finger's out. It slides in very similar to the way the RAM does. You push it in square, and done. It's latched in. So there you have it. That is our motherboard. We have our RAM, we have our ROM. So we have our RAM, we have our hard drives, and everything that's going to get mounted, all the hardware that's going to get mounted to this motherboard, except for the cooling solution and the video card. So the video card I'm going to do an episode on, and then applying the cooling solution we're going to do another episode on, because those are 2 very unique items that we'll cover in their own episode. So, again, I apologize for a lengthy episode. I wanted to be at least somewhat thorough with what's going on here, and there's a lot of stuff involved with this motherboard. I'm going to go through and read the owner's manual so I can get a much better idea of what everything actually is on here, so I know how to properly use this. And even then, I'm probably going to need some help from people that actually know more than I do when it comes to very specifics. But at this point in the game, we have our motherboard, we have our RAM, we have our hard drives, power supply, and the case. So what's left? Cooling solution, the video card. To be coming up. Thank you very much, guys, for watching. I really appreciate, especially if you stuck out till the end, till now. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell icon for the future videos. Next, we're going to be installing the cooling solution and talking about that because it is unique. We are doing liquid cooling on this computer, something that, whilst isn't necessarily very new, isn't exactly known about that much outside of the computer world. Tech nerds already know about the liquid cooling stuff, so they already know what I'm talking about. But for those of you who are not familiar with the cooling world, you might actually find this interesting. We are using water to cool the computer. So, take this off now. I'm not going to be... Thank you very much for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. Again, if you feel like sponsoring this channel, we would really appreciate it. Head on over to patreon.com, The Renaissance Builder. Patreon.com/The Renaissance Builder. It'll take you right to my page. You can subscribe, and every subscription goes a long ways towards helping this channel stay alive. So, thank you very much. As always, guys, I appreciate it. Have a good night. I'll see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.